sort of showing Connolly's legacy of that social transformation and class struggle, not only in 1916, but as you said, in subsequent years, and its relevance today. So thank you. So I'm going to open it up to questions and contributions, and also just to let people know that the Ruskin Student Union have set up a bar outside. So there is a bar if people want to get, don't rush out now, but there is a bar if people want to get drinks at some point. Questions and contributions? Don't be shy. Goodness me, it's not like you need to be shy. Go on then, Ciaran and then Tom.
Yeah, Steve mentioned about current Irish politicians there hobnobbing with royalty and the Queen being invited over and hobnobbing in the centre of Dublin while the Irish population is being subjected to the most brutal austerity regime in Europe after Greece. And it's timely to remember that in 1897 that James Connolly provoked a mass agitation in opposition to Queen Victoria's Jubilee visit to Dublin, and it turned into a real aggressive mass movement very quickly that Connolly addressed open-air crowds, and thousands turned up on the day, repeated baton charges by the police, hundreds were injured. Connolly and Maud Gonne and some of their friends had constructed a massive black coffin with British imperialism, RIP, written on it, which the police tried to smash up, which they launched into the Liffey to a great cheer. Again, a very brutal demonstration, but the Queen was made aware of the opposition, and the whole world was made aware of the mass opposition of the Irish population to these symbols of imperial power. In the course of the day, James Connolly was arrested and subsequently charged in magistrates' court with criminal damage, causing an affray, etc. Didn't go to prison, but got fined. Also, along with Morgan as well, led the opposition to the Boer War, massive campaign in Ireland and this country as well. So there can be no doubts about Connolly's position as regards the monarchy. He was a Republican through and through, thought the monarchy was an absolute abomination, and that any time one of the members of the royal family came to Ireland on an official visit, they should be opposed en masse. And if only we could do the same in this country as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Tom, and then I'll give you a chance to respond. Tom.
Yeah, both Steve and Sean made reference in various ways to what happened after 1916, even after 1921, when you had the Civil War, and then eventually we went into different political parties, Fianna Fáil again especially. Do you think, both of you, that to a great extent the left in Ireland seriously lost out? There was no real credible left-wing party to take the part of the poverty-stricken people, especially in Dublin and in the urban Dublin and in the rural countryside. So I'm studying at the moment something akin to that, but I feel the more I read that there was a dearth of left-wing activity which challenged the two main political parties, as you said quite rightly, which were right-wing in essence.
Do you want to respond to either of those 2 points, and then I'll bring Colin in?
No, we'll take a few more.
Take a few more? Okay. Colin?
Yeah, where were you talking about, Tom? You're talking about just in the 20s? Or
Yeah, 20 and later, yes.
Because I think that one of the things when you look back on that, it's the point I think that Sean made about there was no coherent organisation that could continue on. Connolly's ideas, and therefore things were pulled in a whole lot of different directions. And I think there was a major social upheaval and social revolution when you think about the Limerick Soviet and you think about all that went on. But in effect, the Irish Citizens' Army dissolved itself into the IRA. And you could see how people were pulled by the argument to say we need to fight the military struggle now, and that's what we need to do. And you could see how what I would call the counter-revolutions, the Higginses and all that, those sorts of people were pressing on that argument. Even, sort of late on into the 20s, you saw De Valera sort of making this argument that Labour must wait. But that's what happened in 1918. I saw some figures just when I was reading something a couple of weeks ago. Some really fascinating figures about how well the Labour Party had done in elections in 1917. This is one expression of the upheaval. So Sinn Féin had won something like 350 council seats across Ireland. The Labour Party had won 260, 270 council seats. But when it came to the 1918 election, you had this argument sort of saying, no, the most important thing is independence now. And Sinn Féin made the argument that Labour must wait, and the Labour leaders accepted it. And so they stepped down in favour of Sinn Féin to make the point. And I think it's just a playing out of, Steve, I thought your talk was really interesting about the, sort of the legacy of different things, and I just can't help but feeling that time and again, with the frustrating thing in the subsequent history of Irish politics, is that in a whole lot of ways people have separated off the national struggle from the class struggle. Do you know what I mean? To say one takes precedence at one time. There's that Fianna Fáil view or the Sinn Féin view now I think. The sort of it's a national struggle. We must get the United Ireland first, and then we'll talk about equality, and then we'll talk about separating off. There's another tradition as well, which is I think in the Labour Party, north and south. So they tend to have Labour politics, which is let's only just talk about the class struggle. Let's only talk about the economic struggle, and let's talk about building up trade unions and so on. And let's not talk about the oppression of Catholics in the north, and let's not talk about the injustice of sort of British involvement in the north and all that sort of stuff, which I think is an equal mistake. But it seems, I can't help but agreeing with what Sean was saying. It seems to me Connolly was always looking for the threads that would help to draw together the movement, that would understand that they needed to take on the system, sort of opposing the war, from organising strikes and organising the working class. And I think you see that in Ireland over the last, the election, the shifts to the left in Ireland, north and south, in the last 10 years, you can see coming out of the massive movement against the Iraq War, massive movements in solidarity with the Palestinians, huge movements in support of lesbian and gay liberation, which is absolutely incredible in Ireland after all these years, in support of women's rights, these sort of demands being generated. And then you see the Irish water charges movement sort of breaking out. And this beginning, I was in Dublin a few weeks ago and speaking to some trade union officials and activists, talking about how that movement and the confidence that people are getting from that activism is now feeding back into the workplace and strikes and Lewis drivers and shop workers and all that sort of stuff. And it's the combination of all those things that Connolly was always, I think, about, do you know what I mean? And sort of trying to gather that together in order to overthrow capitalism, is, I think, the thing. And I think the possibility of that and the re-emergence of Connolly's ideas in that as well, I think, is just such a fascinating and optimistic kind of process that's happening at the moment.
Do you want to respond now and then we can take another round? Yeah? Okay. Steve, do you have anything you want to say?
Yes, just a couple of things. I've let them burn out the for a second. Oh, sorry, I got them. Yeah, I mean, about royalty, Connolly was absolutely vociferously a Republican, not just an Irish Republican, but against the whole concept of monarchy. And I have to admit that it stuck in my throat, and I couldn't come up with a plausible explanation to why McGuinness shook the Queen's hand, and he didn't need to do that. If he wanted to greet another head of state, if that was what he felt he had to do, even a state that was occupying 6 counties in the north of Ireland, I don't think that there was any need for a public handshake, and I think it was complete opportunism on his behalf. But it just shows you where Sinn Féin have gone. I completely agree with the points that have been made that they are now becoming, they're actually, in a way, they want to become Fianna Fáil. They've given up all pretense of having a socialist republic. They seem content to administer for a long period of time the 6-county statelet in the north and seek to gain power in the south. And I think very, very candidly put your finger on the two-facedness of all of it. I mean, I seen the Sinn Féin leaders there a couple of weeks ago in Dublin, standing, commemorating the rising. Every one of them was speaking about James Connolly. At the same time, they're implementing the politics of austerity in the north. And for a party of national liberation, let's put aside the socialist side. For a party of national liberation, supposedly national liberation, they're now saying that they're agreeing with the European Union, which institutionalises privatisation. I mean, if you look at the fourth rail package, which has just been passed in Europe, the European Commission, I think it's gone before the Parliament, it's been ratified now. Basically, you cannot have a nationalised railway system in this country anymore. You can't do it. It's illegal. Because French companies could sue you, German companies could sue you, could sue the government for restricting their trade. And that's what it's all about. The European Union is about opening up markets that have been previously closed to private capital so they can come in and make a profit in it. And Sinn Féin are now supporting that, which I believe is completely bizarre, even if you take away the socialist elements and you just take them as nationalists or Republicans. Absolutely bonkers thing to do. The point that you make, Conrad, I think there were possibilities. I mean, the Republican Congress organisations they got, they never became mainstream. And I think there was always. I mean, I think Connolly in a lot of ways was the exception in Irish trade unionism. If you look at Belfast, you had the what they call them, the bread and gas socialists.
Gas and water socialists.
Yeah, and you know, and even around Dublin, you had the same thing. And there was that very conservative layer of I suppose, trade unionists who were just interested in the economic struggle. And unfortunately, those people did capitulate to nationalism. And you can imagine, I'm trying to think of a similar situation today, and I keep thinking about South Africa and the role of the ANC played in South Africa. You can imagine they went through a heroic anti-imperialist struggle. People who then became arch-conservatives actually put their lives at risk in that struggle. So they had some sort of credibility, which I suppose is very difficult for us to look back and understand. But if you talk to somebody of my parents' generation back in Derry, Mark McGuinness is still a hero, because he was the 17-year-old who fought the British Army with a pram gun along the Lone Road. And I suppose it's difficult unless you were there to understand how these things could happen. How could the leaders of Labour capitulate to the nationalists? Even when, I think you pointed out, Con, was it when were those elections? Was it 19 or 18?
1918 was the big Sinn Féin.
It was 18, yeah. The Labour Party ran Sinn Féin really, really close in the elections. And then they gave up the struggle, they gave up the ghost. They said, well, you go ahead, we trust you, and we'll come back at some later stage. And, you know, it's almost bizarre to think that could happen. So absolutely agree. I mean, I think that the main point is, and I think Connolly summed it up very well, you know, that the cause of Labour is the cause of Ireland, the cause of Ireland is the cause of Labour. You can't separate both things. You can't build an alliance between working class Catholics and working class politics on a disingenuous basis. You can't just say, as some people have one of the most bizarre positions, I won't name the organisation, but it's well, we want a socialist federation of Great Britain and Ireland. You know, what does that mean? I mean, even the loyalists don't want that. I mean, they've given up all sort of pretense that that's going to happen. So, you know, when left groups do get involved in this, they have to approach it from a principled point of view. If you're going to have an Irish revolution, you do have to have it, firstly, on the basis of a united Ireland and against British imperialism.
Thank you very much. Sure.
Yeah, there have been competing histories of Connolly. You know, and I think both of them taking a slightly stagist view. I mean, Austin Morgan wrote about with Connolly, where he says Connolly's fantastic trade union organiser, brilliant militant. His big mistake was to associate himself with the national struggle and engage with national liberation and engage with the volunteers and the IRB. then you have Beresford, Ellis and Desmond Greaves to a certain extent saying the opposite. They say in Ireland today, as in previous centuries, the mainstream of socialism is in the national struggle. Now you cannot subordinate socialism and the struggle for socialism to the struggle for nationhood. There's a difference between self-determination for nations, which we all support, and the struggle for national liberation. A big difference between that and the imposition of a nationalist solution to a problem. I think both approaches are wrong. I think it's wrong as well. Nobody's done it today, but it's important we're careful about this. The very people who want to put Connolly on a pedestal and turn him into a harmless icon are also the people who want to repudiate his tradition. And the best way to pay tribute to Connolly is to engage critically with his ideas and his theories and his practice. And I think one of Connolly's mistakes was that he thought that if he threw his lot in with the militant Republicans, he understood the difference between them and the right wing of the Irish volunteers. If he threw his lot in with the militant Republicanism, a successful struggle of national liberation would draw the militant Republicans in automatically to a struggle for socialism. And of course, that wasn't the case, and they needed not just the theory of socialist revolution, they also needed an organisation that could carry that through. And instead what happened, after the defeat of the anti-treaty forces, is that the whole question became, how do we protect the nation? And then you had the establishment of two right-wing parties trying to put national interest above everything else, and workers' interests were completely repudiated and relegated. And tragically, that is where the counter-revolution came from. I want to say one other thing which is fantastically important about, and I know that Sarah talked quite a bit about it earlier, but just to emphasise the social transformation of Ireland in recent years. I mean, I was brought up a very devout Catholic, training to be a Catholic priest. Even in my lifetime, we were taught by the priests that women were an occasion of sin. That even in my lifetime, this was the dominant ideology of the Catholic Church. And just look what's happened in recent years. I mean, it is phenomenal. The first country in the world to have a referendum on same-sex marriage, every county in Ireland, even bloody Donegal, voted in favour of same-sex marriage except one, Leitrim. And even in Leitrim, 46% of the people voted in favour of it. I'm very proud that our comrades who've got into the Dáil have said straight away that as soon as they get the opportunity, they're going to put in a motion to repudiate the 8th Amendment on abortion, and Sarah talked about that this morning. But also, the question of Magdalene Alder is, I think, more and more is beginning to emerge about the role of women and the way in which women were treated in the period of counter-revolution. And I think gradually that the Church's position has been completely eroded and the dominance has been completely undermined. I mean, you were saying that many people still say they're Catholics because they associate Catholics with the penal laws and as an anti-imperialist religion. Actually, in terms of their obedience to the Church as an institution, I think that has been dramatically undermined. And it's interesting, I sadly had a funeral of my brother a few weeks ago. Loads of Irish relatives came over, all pretty devout Catholics. All of them, to a woman and a man, whilst asserting their Catholicism in a general sense, repudiate the priests and the Church and the bishops because of, obviously the child abuse scandal in the Church has been a major factor in that. But also, more importantly, I think, especially for women, the idea that the priest had authority over or had control over your own social lives, your own sexual lives, and your own body. That, I think, has been that's a real transformation that has taken place in Irish society, and one greatly to be welcomed.
Thank you. Comrade here, and then Sarah.
I think a really good answer, because in England, the free churches, I'm talking about the Methodists, the Baptists, the Quakers, and so forth, have a huge impact on freeing children working their minds, the social aspects, the worst aspects of Victorian life were really helped by the church movement. And it was free church keeping, it wasn't the Church of England. My question I was wondering is, in Ireland, and it might have already been answered, but what was the position of the Catholic Church? And were there free churches in Ireland, or was it just mainly the Catholic Church? What was their position on the struggle that the Irish people were going through. What was the position of the Catholic Church? Were they helped? Did they lead trade unions? Did they lead the fight? What was their role? What was their position?
Thank you. Okay, Sarah?
Yeah, I was going to say something about legacy, but I will just comment on the last thing Sean said about the church. I mean, obviously people in Ireland have moved away from the church. You know, the referendum on marriage equality has proven that, but the state has not moved away from the church, and I think that's the key thing at the moment, because if you look at, obviously the campaign for abortion rights is just one part of it, but the other thing is the education system. I mean, our sort of primary education system is still run by the church, you know, in such a way that churches sit on boards of management, so they are in charge of admissions policy. So there's a huge campaign at the moment to get admission policies changed, because what's happening is schools are saying no to children who are not baptised. So in a changing Ireland, less and less children are not baptised in the Catholic Church. So, you know, if you're of another religion or no religion, you can't go to your local school now because they can say, no, sorry, we don't want you because you're not baptised, and it's causing huge problems. And the other area where the church are still very involved is health, in terms of hospitals. And a recent thing that was in the news just last week, they're reconfiguring the Irish health system and they're amalgamating hospitals. So in Dublin, for example, they're about to amalgamate the maternity hospital with St Vincent's Hospital. But what was in the news last week was, and the maternity hospital, the National Maternity Hospital, has its own independent board, but the part of the main hospital is being amalgamated with still has nuns involved, and they are refusing to basically go on with the amalgamation unless they get to run the maternity hospital. So this, you know, they still want to be in charge of maternity care. So that's just something about the church. And just a point about legacy. I mean, I was just sitting here listening to the two talks, and thank you very much. And I was just thinking about trade unions and the role of trade unions and the legacy of Connolly in terms of the importance of labour as an agent for change. And I think I have to mention the water charges movement in Ireland, which we're winning. You know, water charges have come in, despite the biggest movement since the foundation of the state, but since the new government has been formed in the last week, they're now being suspended and hopefully they will be abolished. But I think the point about the water charges movement is the 5 unions were behind the water charges movement, as well as political groups and community groups. But I think that the power of unions to bring out numbers cannot be underestimated. And I think because 5 unions were behind it, I think that's part of the strength of it. And just as well, Sean, you mentioned mob rule. I mean, isn't that the legacy of Connolly, that he was trying to organise the mob? He was trying to organise the mob that nobody, you know, in current state apparatuses want mobilised, because the sort of telling people that the road to democracy through Parliament is the only way, I think, suits obviously certain people, and having thousands of people out on the streets or workers standing up for their rights and pay and all the rest of it isn't in their interest. So I think that sort of the role of the union is obviously one of the big legacies of Connolly.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to wrap up soon, so if there are any more points people wanted to make for Sean and Steve to respond to, we'll take them now.
Well,
so Helen, yeah.
I mean, is all I wanted to say was, you know, I agreed with Sean talking about the legacy, you know. A child in the 50s, you know, I knew nothing about Irish history, working class Irish girl, and I knew nothing about it. I knew nothing about Connolly. When I came to Ruskin, I decided not to focus on Irish history. When I was asked why, I was saying because I'm coming totally fresh, I know nothing about it. So the legacy for me was that the church ruled my life and my family's life. Now when I hear you talking, I had an emotive interest in Ireland because my family are still there, but I haven't kept up politically because for my own development I moved away from that. But to hear you talking about the movements and everything, it's nice to see that maybe it's taken all this time for the legacy to change and for people to actually start. I think where it isn't, for me, where it hasn't really improved is what Ciaran said about the brutalising, the economic cuts brutalised working class people over the last 10, 15 years, and that is very much part of, you know, my family and where I come from. So I think they were so brutalised that they don't have the energy or didn't know where it all to stand up and to fight. So it would be nice to know from Sarah, and I was going to ask her, do you think that there is a working class movement standing up in Ireland for...
Absolutely, because I think it started with water charges.
Yeah.
It became about everything else. It became about austerity, it became about hospital waiting lists, it became about everything. The anger was about the state of the country in general. The water charge, yes, while it was a penalty on their pocket, became the symbol of everything else that was wrong. So I think
So maybe it's taken all this time for people to stand up.
yeah, and I think just the nature of how the political parties in the Dáil, how that has changed as well. I mean, the Labour Party has been absolutely almost wiped out. There's 7 Labour Party TDs now, and there's 6 radical left. I mean, that's something.
Yeah,
That's
in my day, yes.
That's a transformation. Now, where that goes,
Yeah.
you know.
And the other thing from both of the speakers was the thing about the Queen and the Irish people being ecstatic because the Queen comes to Cork. I mean, my family were ecstatic, and I couldn't understand it. And from an emotive point of view, as a person that's interested in social history, the only way I could reconcile myself with it was that they felt accepted by a wider community, the working class people, which is really, really sad. It is really sad, but that's the only way I could come to terms with it, and I don't know what people... I don't know there was a big movement in Ireland about people who should Queen's hand or not. Was there a big? Not really. No, that was my feeling. Not really. I think my family were pleased, and I couldn't understand that.
Thanks, Helen. So we'll just take these 2 final points then, and then ask the speakers to respond. Okay.
Yeah, again, it's about the legacy. So Sean and Steve talked about the immediate legacy during the War of Independence, where a revolutionary situation arose, and Connolly's ideas were in the ascendant amongst large groups of workers, where Soviets were set up. You had massive land seizures as well, and on a couple of occasions you had a crazy situation where the Republican nationalist leadership are trying to repress the revolutionary mass as it rises, and you had occasions where the Black and Tans and the IRA had both turned up to suppress a land seizure at the same time, in it working together. This is during the War of Independence. Then immediately you've got a massive backlash by this Republican elite, institute this unpleasant state. But Connolly supporters were still there. And Steve mentioned the Republican Congress that later arose, but there was also a soirée workers group. You'd have to mention people like Heather O'Donnell, long struggle for Connolly's ideas, Frank Ryan, and mentioned the Connolly column that went to fight in the Spanish Civil War and opposed General O'Duffy's blue shirts on the streets in Ireland also. So that radical left-wing Republican revolutionary tradition, though heavily repressed in the 20s, 30s and 40s, was still there, and people were still willing to risk their lives for the Irish working class and for the international revolution.
Yes.
Yeah, I was thinking of the legacy of Connolly. I remember back in the 1980s, I invited Jeremy Corbyn to come and talk when I was at college, and he turned up and we were both wearing those James Connolly badges. I remember those gold and green badges of the Connolly Association, I think, produced them. And I remember saying to him, oh, you sort of influenced by Connolly. He goes, oh, absolutely, it's really important that we don't lose the legacy of Connolly. I don't think Corbyn wears that badge, but knows that, like me, he's got a sort of socialist badge collection, and it's in his collection. But I think it's always been a contradiction. I mean, Steve mentioned about how it's represented in music. I mean, you've got the Wolf Tones version of Connolly, where he's made out to be a sort of Republican and shamrocks growing on his grave, etc., etc. But you've always had an alternative to that. I mean, another example of James, it's Christy Moore's song about James Connolly and his links to the trade union movement and James Larkin. And I think that's always been, those traditions have always sort of been alongside each other. But I think it's really important to recognise that things are changing. I mean, looking in the Irish elections recently, that was the first time when Fianna Fáil and Fianna Gael didn't get
a dominance. And actually their share of the vote is actually decreasing. It's at an all-time low. And actually interesting, in the elections, the local elections and the elections just the other day, Labour and the Tories vote is also shrinking. So I think that things are constantly changing. And I think that there are certainly many opportunities. But I think the real legacy of Connolly is that to identify that real social change happens outside of Parliament. You know, it's important, you know, it's fantastic to see socialists elected into Parliament, into the Royal and into the Irish Assembly. But what Connolly recognises is actually fundamental change happens outside when people recognise that they have the potential to change the world. And I think that's the real legacy. And it's a very difficult legacy for people to take away from Connolly because it's so apparent when you read his work, when you look at his life. It is all about looking to ordinary people to change the world, transform themselves in the process. And I think that's the legacy that we need to capture and we need to retain.
Right, thank you. So can I ask you to sort of finally respond to those points?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first question was very interesting. I mean, if you look at what happened in Ireland, because of English colonialism and because of the plantation of the Northern Six Counties in particular, you had churches like the Presbyterian Church, like the Methodists, who played a very, very progressive role in England, according to people like Weber, other people like that. They didn't really play that role in Ireland through the peace. You had, I mean, the leaders of 1798, Wolfe Tone and other leaders of the United Irishmen were actually Protestants. Came from the first republicanism as opposed to the nationalism was created by Protestants, so I suppose you could credit that with that. But no, I think because they then became involved in defending the status quo, there was a sort of hierarchy. Church of Ireland was the established church, Presbyterians were beneath that, and Methodists and people like that, and at the very bottom were Catholics. And yet penal laws that not just outlawed Catholicism or outlawed the Catholic Mass, but they actually discriminated against Presbyterians and Methodists and people like that as well, in favour of the established Church of Ireland. So that was how things sort of looked in Ireland. I'm not saying that on a personal level, but on a community level, the churches wouldn't have played a decent role. Obviously, there would have been individual people who did. The Catholic Church played an absolutely appalling role, to be quite honest, in any sort of revolutionary movement that was against it, full stop. These people knew where their bread was buttered, especially the higher up you got in the church, the more likely they were to be sided with a conservative and anti-revolutionary. Of course, you had some spectacular people who were contrary to that example, who led, as Father Murphy and Webster on, who've always had this sort of revolutionary. I suppose it's almost like the Sandinistas in Nicaragua, revolutionary theologian. What's the word for it?
Liberation theology.
Liberation theology, yeah. You almost had that strand in the Catholic Church, but it was certainly never the dominant strand. The church was always archly conservative. And funny enough, I just went back to, we went to visit Liam Mills' grave. It's quite funny, after Rising, you just look at one of the Sinn Féin councillors is a decent one, but he got out to the local council what the local church and what all the local notables had said about the Rising. And without exception, they were absolutely scathing about the Rising. This was a desperate adventure, by these, records, and this was the attitude the church had to the middle classes, if you like, in Ireland, especially as it went up the class system. The role of the trade unions as regards water, I think it's not an isolated example. I mean, there have been times when the trade union movement in Ireland have played a progressive role, and I hope it continues to really do. I hope that the Irish Congress and trade unions do start fighting on a class basis, but it's almost, it will take a shift in an ideological position. I don't think it's just going to happen through struggle or spontaneously. I think it's going to take a philosophical argument and a political argument to change that. Because look, I mean, it's quite apparent that class collaboration has failed. It's over. There's absolutely no argument for subordinating the worker struggle to the national struggle anymore. It's gone. So, I mean, Irish trade unions have to take that role. I mean, I'm not condemning Irish trade unions. Obviously, trade unions in this country should do the same thing. I mean, I'm sure Francis O'Grady would be delighted to set up the equivalent of a citizens' army over here to protect us from police violence. But that's what we need to do. And throughout Europe, actually, there has to be a philosophical re-examination of what we're all about as trade unions. Are we just about helping our bourgeoisie, be that on a national or cross-European level, exploit other people in other places? Or are we about transforming society? I mean, that's a discussion that's got to take part in the trade union movements. Yeah, about royalty. I mean, there was protests led by people like Arrighi and sort of dissident Republican groups to the Queen's visit. But they were very small, and they were actually repressed by the Republicans who say, oh, this is just not mainstream Republic. They call themselves Republicans, and they don't care anymore. By the mainstream, they call themselves Republicans. They would say that we've got to be statesmanlike, and how's Jerry or Martin ever going to get the president of Ireland if we cause a president of Queen's here? And that's really, I think that's what WhatsApp was all about. It was about presenting an acceptable face of Sinn Féin in order to get more electoral gains. I can't think of an explanation. If anybody's got one, please tell me. I can't think of an explanation which that doesn't go along that way. What was the other one? I can't read the old handwriting. Did I answer anybody's question? Was there anything I didn't answer about the church? About the church. I think I answered that. Please, probably.
Thank you very much.
I'll be very quick. What you said about the role of the church, of religions, and particular denominations in England. E.P. Thompson's History of the English Working Class has got an amazing chapter saying exactly that, and he calls it the transforming power of the cross, that the Methodists brought to the working class sort of methods of organisation, all the rest of it, and they were central to the organisation of workers, only to a point. Only to a point. The idea that then the workers could take control for themselves, of course, was anathema to any religious sect or group. But in Ireland, the church establishment sided unequivocally with the forces of reaction throughout the whole of the 20th century and beyond. They repudiated the Rising in 1938, when there was a vague attempt to bring in the Mother and Child Act by Noel Brown to offer some kind of basic social security to families. The church opposed it because they said it would lead to communism and the breakup of the family. And the famous case of the bishops blessing the blue shirts going to fight for Franco in Dunleary, in Dunleary Harbour. I mean, the church as an establishment has always been on the side of reaction in Ireland, and the handful of individual priests who have stood out against it have actually been marginalised. But as we said before, the credibility of the church as an institution seriously undermined because of the child abuse scandal, and although I think Sarah's right, that they still exercise an undue influence in the levels of government. I think at the level of the ordinary lives of Irish working people, that hold is no longer anything like it was. Just quickly to put the figures on Desi's point, in 1982, Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil between them got 85% of the vote. In the last election, between them they got 45% of the vote. Now this tells me something. The old order is cracking. It's cracking because of the resistance on the streets, particularly water charges. And that resistance is an echo, and the best tribute that you can make or give to Connolly and his tradition is to carry on the struggle today. And I'll end by saying this. I don't think anybody here can be in any doubt. You can argue about legacy, argue about what Connolly would have done here and there, argue about this and that he should or didn't do, but actually, if you boil it down to the essentials, you can say unequivocally Connolly was an internationalist. Unequivocally, he believed in working class struggle and the self-activity of the working class. And unequivocally, he was a revolutionary. He wanted to overthrow the system of imperialism and capitalism that dominated the lives of workers. Now, how shall I put it? Those attributes are good enough for me, and therefore we should celebrate his legacy and we should build them.